Alright everybody, how are we doing? Today we're going to take a quick look at how to use the LabyrinthDef to generate your own custom labyrinths. So I'm going to go through what most of these values mean and kind of show you some examples from some generations that we did. Right here, what we see is going to be the Ruins of Aldurum labyrinth. It's going to be my main thing that I'm using for an example here. This is going to be the LabyrinthDef, which you'll find inside of the defs folder. So first off, going down the list, we have pretty much standard fare at the top with the basics, in which case just unique def name and description, all that label. So you should know what to do with that. So down here, so for the under the labyrinth gen category, we have a few important things to take in mind. So first off, the map size. This is the size of the map that the labyrinth will spawn on. All right, now this is if the labyrinth is using its own world object, and the world object it's going to be using, you're going to list right here. So the idea then is that if you make your own custom world object, in this case I called it Valdurum WO for world object, then whenever it spawns that world object and puts a map on there, this is the size that map's going to be. Is linked is used for linking together multiple labyrinths on one map. We're going to see later on that there's going to be a list that it's going to pull from. But the idea here is that if the labyrinth is marked as linked, then it will be then any other labyrinth that is marked that is listed inside of its linked labyrinth list will also spawn on the same map. All right, target biome. This right here is if you're so. Basically, the idea is that this is going to be the biome that the labyrinth itself will spawn on. If you're not doing an enclosed biome and you're doing something that's themed, like a desert temple, and you want it to spawn in the desert, then this is where you would go. Now, just filling this in was not going to make it spawn in the desert. Whenever on the object you use to spawn it, either on the scenario part or on the thing comp, that is the labyrinth key, right? That's where you're going to determine if you're going to use the target biome or not. And the idea there is that then you can set what biome the labyrinth wants to use inside the biome def right here. Alright, steps away. Steps away is basically doing the same thing, where if you do designate on the thing that's generating the labyrinth, either the key or the scene part, that it's not on the same tile, that's going to use a new tile, then it does a random walk algorithm to get away. So like the idea though is that this is kind of like a rough arbitrary number. If you say don't use the same tile, this is kind of an estimation on how far away it will be. Not that important for actually generating them yourself. The more you use it, the more you'll understand it. Enclosed is basically talking about the area around the labyrinth. So if you look right here, this is an enclosed labyrinth, and that you see where it fills in all the way to the corners of the map. Right, all the way through. So there is no outside map area. I could have also put not enclosed, in which case it would have left the outsides open, and it would be a normal map outside the walls of the labyrinth itself. So this is what the enclosed function does. It should be noted that it turns off for whenever you turn on is cave-like. Is cave-like is a bit of we're going to talk about that later. Okay. Is filled. So filled happens if you're not using rooms and if you're not enclosed. And the idea is that enclosing fills in the whole thing. If you're not using rooms, then is filled will fill in these dead spots inside of here. In which case right here I'm doing is filled because I am using rooms. So my rooms end up filling on top of them. This right here may end up getting pulled out. I'm going to have to go back and revisit it. A lot of these things became kind of secondary with cave-like. So we'll talk more about that later. Okay, so is walled means that exactly what it sounds like. If the labyrinth itself has walls on it inside of the labyrinth. This right here comes down to it's more of a conceptual thing if you want to do terrain textures and stuff like that, or if you want to use terrains as walls for blockage. Once again, this is a little bit harder to explain on how to use. It's kind of used on a higher end code level. And I may end up just incorporating it all into cave-like anyway. The idea here is that the more functionality I break up, the more confusing and ambiguous it is. And so that's why I try to roll them up into easy variables for y'all. Alright, is roofed? is basically asking if the path itself is roofed. So for right here, since we're underground, it is. The path is going to be everything you see that's tiled here. So basically everything that's the actual main path of the labyrinth going through. And this is going to be everything that has a roof over it. So basically everywhere that has the path terrain is going to have a roof over it. Is shell roofed? The shell is the area that gets filled in over here. So filled is for the shell. So basically, if these filled in areas have roofs or not. Once again, this may end up going away. Same thing with shell floored. The idea there is that if you're not using the room system, then the shelved roof and the shell floored would put in roofing and flooring inside of these areas, right? Once again, this is mostly just for expansion hooks that I left in there whenever I was coding this up. All right. Is Cavelight? That's going to get its own slide. Cavelight is a bit of a pain in the ass. Before, I used to have over 20 different Boolean variables other than these to set different characteristics of the dungeon, and I kind of eliminated most of them just by doing one that just kind of chooses between two rough cuts of labyrinths, and that's cave-like and not cave-like, or geometric. This is not cave-like. This is a geometric labyrinth, so as you can see, it has nice blocky hallways. The cave-like tries to be more, cave-like. All right, use block floors. This one right here, we're going to talk a little bit more with the cave-like, just because I kind of did them both together, so we'll talk more about that in a little bit. In fact, actually, let's go ahead and switch over. Let's jump through, since mostly everything here is well. So first, I'm sorry. So first off, let's talk about the most important thing: path width. So over here, I kind of skipped over them. Path width is everything that this labyrinth is spawned off of. This is the general scaling of the labyrinth itself. In general, the idea, so path width of 4, if you look over here, this is a zoomed in section of this area down here of the labyrinth, and you'll see that path width of 4 basically means that aside from the center row of the path, it's going to go out 4 cells in each direction. So what's going to actually happen is that the width of the path itself, the full width of the path, is going to be equal to 2 times the path width plus 1. And this is going to determine basically how the whole labyrinth itself gets scaled. This is also going to determine how big the rooms are in between. So this is by far the most important number in this whole thing. Whenever you use different path widths, obviously they get really big really quickly, since you have this 2p interaction going on. So the idea then is that you're going to pretty much be using only 1 through, usually 6 becomes way too big. So so then there's only so many path widths, but these path widths will change the size of the rooms. So later on, when you're making rooms, you're going to have to keep that in mind. Okay, let's talk a little bit more about Cavelight. Okay, so this right here is actually the exact same instance. This is the exact same LabyrinthDef, except I changed certain things. So you can see that we still have the same everything else. It's still path width of 4, map size 100. All of this is still the same, except for this right here. So one thing I turned off is enclosed. And what happens is that you can see that now it looks like I'm outside, right, where I actually have borders around me, right, all the way around the map. And this is what the enclosed thing does, right? So right here I turned it off, so now I actually don't have, and now I can actually see around there. So is filled, so is Cavelight. So I now put that true. What this is going to do is, first off, it's going to apply a randomization algorithm to the nodes. The randomization algorithm is more dramatic with a smaller path width. For example, right here with the path width 4, you can kind of see where we still kind of have these blocky paths going through. Now the path itself, it should note, is going to be the shadow. So if you see light water here and then dark water here, you can kind of see this outline going through. That's going to be the shadow of the roof, because right now I still have it as is roofed, right, over here. And the reason why I did that is you can see exactly what my noising algorithms are doing. So what's happening is that it's making a path right here, and because it's cave-like, it's randomizing where the nodes are at, so they're no longer in straight lines from each other. Now they're going to be offset. It also allows nodes to go diagonally. So in geometric, they can only go to neighbors who are immediately adjacent to them. Right here, it is possible to have diagonal connections. And on top of that, it also noises everything. So what happens is that it generates a wall around the path itself, and then it noises the outside of the wall with whatever your block is, your block def is. So that's what this water is out here. Alright, so it looks like it's a big puddle, but if I were to put this as rock, this would all be rock instead. And then what happens is that everything that's dark blue got noised on the inside. And basically what it is, it's doing a proximity noise algorithm that I picked up from Xylee, where it's going through and it's basically easing the edges with a slight random variance going on inside of it. And the result is that you end up with non-shear walls, right? And you kind of end up with a more cave-like feel. The caves are going to get a little bit more loving in development. I'm going to have the caves be the main avenue for boss rooms. But that's going to be more about that later. Something else I did was I turned on these variables. So for this example, you can see that walk in is false and walk out is false. The idea here is that this is if you walk into or out of the labyrinth, or if you're using a portal to get into or out of the labyrinth. So right here you can see that it's both false and it's enclosed, right? You can't really use enclosed and walk in or walk out together. So right here you can see that we're enclosed in completely, and then we have our teleportation method, or our portal inward, down here. There is no way out of the labyrinth except for the way, in which case you, except for the way that you put to come out, right? I'm sorry, except for the way back in. Alright. So if I did not put that, so here you can see that I set both of these values to true. And what this means is that now I can actually walk into the labyrinth and out of the labyrinth. So first off, each one, walking in and walking out, has two Boolean values associated. Is in on z direction and is in on positive direction. So the idea then is that we're walking in. Is it on the z direction? It is. Okay. Is it on the positive z direction? It is. So the idea then is, of course, the z direction is going up. This is the positive z direction is towards the top of the map. The negative z direction is towards the bottom of the map. So therefore, you can see then that that it's going in on the positive z direction right here. Bam. This is my in. Okay. Now I also put for it to walk out. Now walking out's a little bit trickier because the walkout algorithm itself tries to find the place that's most okay. So let me just show it to you. So right here, so we say is out in the z direction, false, which means it's going to be out in the x direction. So the x is of course the horizontal direction. And then we say is out in the positive x direction, and we say false, it's out in the negative x direction. And of course you know that the negative x direction is to the left while the positive x direction is to the right. So therefore it's going out on the negative x direction. Okay, so the way it decides the out node is basically whatever side I put it to, it's going to find the node with the highest step count. So for example, right here, I put it out on the negative x direction, so it was looking at everything on this side of the labyrinth for an exit, and it wanted to find the one that was furthest away from the entrance over here. So obviously the absolute furthest one was way over here, but that's not the side we told it to leave on. We told it to leave on this side. So therefore it found the furthest away one that also left in the correct direction, and that's this one down here. If we would have said to leave out of the positive x direction, then it would have gen the exit over here. And likewise for the minus and so on and so forth. Okay. So for the door is outdoor. I guess I should have turned that on. This right here, basically, I need to even see if this still works. I haven't used this in a hot minute. It's kind of old code. But what it does, or what it tries to do, is it tries to locate anywhere, like here and here, where the path exits the labyrinth space and put doors. Right, so like that, it's like a doorway in and a doorway out. Once again, I'm going to have to revisit that. I kind of have better methods now. That's kind of our old code. So, I mean, play around with it, see if you can get it to work. That never hurts, right? Okay, so now for the rest of the def, what we're using, so first off we have the settings. These are the adventure settings. These settings pretty much let you control the adventure mode aspect of the dungeon. I know that some of you, as you're trying to incorporate this into your own personal mods, you don't want all this extra adventure mode crap we added on, so you can turn it all off. Use weather is pretty self-explanatory. You can either use the weather or not use the weather. If you use the weather, it's going to automatically set the weather to whatever you have the weather def name every turn. Now a turn, I guess let me just go ahead and start off with what a turn is. So right here you see ticks per turn. So if you don't know, a game tick is equal to what they call a third. Is literally under a second, like a third, like it's a third, the third minute of an hour. Damn it! But yeah, so you get a third, and this is equal to 1/60th of a second. So the idea here is that this is going to be the number of ticks that these things all refresh at. I call them turns, you know, in respect for the RPG elements. And the idea here is that you can see that this is 600, right? So this would of course be 10 seconds. So the idea here is that every 10 seconds is whenever my adventure comp basically refreshes everything. All right, and that's going to be true for the weather. So basically every 10 seconds, the weather is going to make sure it updates to the same weather. In my case, I made a special weather called RPG Gloom. It's very, very dark and, well, gloomy, because you imagine that a dungeon would be dark and gloomy. Alright, so use food freeze, use rest freeze, use joy freeze. This right here will freeze your pawn's associated needs, right? So if you don't want to have to worry about food at all, rest at all, or joy at all, this will freeze the value of them at a fairly high level. So like that, you don't have to worry about, basically keeping them happy while you're trying to, crawl through this dungeon and grab treasure chests and kill people, right? So this is if you want to freeze them entirely. Over here for the modifiers, the use needs modifier, I need to see if this is actually still being used. I was using this as a catch-all, but I'm actually probably going to disable that, so don't worry about that one. But here you see use food modifier, use rest modifier, use joy modifier. The idea here is that this is going to modify your food, rest, or joy every turn, and this is going to be the amount that it modifies it every turn. The idea here is that these are all based off of percentages, right? So it gets a little hairy. You can do the math, though, don't worry. And the idea here is that this is how much of a percent it's ticking up each turn. Needs per turn, don't worry about that one, too. Like I said, I was trying to do a general catch-all, but then I figured it'd be better if I broke them all out individually anyway. Well, it'll give you more control. Okay, so for Use Adventure Thoughts, this is, and Use Adventure Health. Both of these are still in their infancy. I'm going to develop them more. Adventure Thoughts pretty much doesn't really do anything like what I want it to do right now. What it's doing is that it tries to remove stupid heat-ifs. I'm sorry, stupid thoughts. The heat-ifs is for the other one. So it tries to remove thoughts. So like what is it called? Saw Fresh Corpse or Saw Corpse. So the idea there is that if you're in a dungeon going full kill mode, you don't really care if you see corpses because you're making corpses. So I try to wipe that out. It's not working nearly as well as I wanted it to, so I'm probably just going to do an entire overhaul on that system. But if you want to turn it off, you can. Right now, it's not, like I said, it doesn't really do much. Use Adventure Health. This right here is giving you a, this is something that I'm probably going to overhaul in the future as well because I have a lot of good ideas about this. For right now, what it's doing is that it's giving you a passive health regeneration every turn, where you get so much health every turn. The health is returned to each heat-if. So if you don't know how the game works, the idea is that your pawn has different body parts. So this is just a rough idea. And each body part has its own HP. and then the HP of that body part is reduced by heat ifs, right? And the heat ifs have what's called a severity. And what's happening is that, so like whenever you get shot, you might get like, you know, saying a heat if on your arm and then on your torso, right? Well, what's happening here is that every turn it's going to automatically bandage all open wounds, so like that you don't have to worry about your guys bleeding out in the middle of your adventure. So like that, whenever the fighting ends, sitting around resting is actually beneficial instead of harmful. And like that, you don't have to always run your guys out to get medical aid with a bed or anything. So every turn, your wounds will get tended, and then also every heat if will tick down in severity. So every body part will get healed up by this amount. I'll make a video that kind of shows the healing rate on that. Use party. This is future hook, so I don't really use that right now. Party size, once again, it's going to be a future hook. Checkpoint, future hook. Drafted. So whenever you're inside of the adventure, basically your pawns are going to always be drafted. This means that they are always drafted. So every turn they get redrafted. If you undraft them, then the next turn cycle they're going to become redrafted. What this means is that you do have a little bit of time in between each turn to have them do good old-fashioned NPC work. I'm trying to do away with that. I'm trying to get everything to be used in drafted mode. The game's obviously not really set up for that, but I feel like drafted mode is more of an adventure mode, while the other mode is more of a sandbox mode. So yeah, so drafted. If you don't want them to always be drafted, if you want to try to go through there on your own with your own abilities, then just turn that off. Okay, jumping over here to the other side. This is going to be the def names of everything that comes in. The block def name, the block is basically anything that blocks you inside of here, so this is going to be the walls. In this case, I used a special wall that I made called RPG wall. This wall cannot be selected, it cannot be destroyed, it cannot be deconstructed, and it automatically heals up its health. So basically, it's an invincible wall. The idea there is that, saying if you don't want them to be able to mine through the maze, basically, or deconstruct their way through the maze, then you can set up RPG walls. I believe RPG walls are included in the base kit. I have to see. Floor def name is paved tile, so basically this is going to be anywhere that they have a floor. So earlier we were talking about if the shell is floored, or if the path is or the path is always floored. This is going to be the def name of the terrain that's going to be slapped down as the flooring. So in this case, you can see that it's paved tiles, giving me this nice grid look. Door def name, this is for the doors. Once again, at this point, I think this is actually vestigial. The doors right now are being handled by the lots, so this right here I don't think actually does anything. But the game only has 2 door def names, like auto door and door, so whatever, right? So block stuff. So this is what the stuff that the block is going to be made out of. So for example, I'll have a wall. Wall can be made out of a bunch of stuff. I called it blocks granite, and that's going to be the stuff that the wall is going to be made out of. So I can make it out of slate or anything else I want. I can make gold walls if I wanted to. Floor block def name. So the idea here is that this is going to be a terrain that can block movement, or just another terrain in general. You don't have to block movement with it. You can do whatever you want with it. But what it's going to do is that if you use the use floor block, where is it at? Up over here. So this thing right here. Basically what this is telling it to do is that instead of using this def for your walls, right here. Instead of using this def for your walls, it's going to use your water def, your terrain def. Alright, the door stuff, so this is the stuff that the doors are made out of. Once again, it's probably obsolete. I'm going to have to dig through it. Entrance def name. This is going to be the name of the object, of the thing that you're going to have as the entrance. So for example, I have RPG stairs up. That's this nice little building that you see over here. The idea is that this is the entrance of the labyrinth itself. This is where my portal teleports me in at, and this is going to be my my starting point. So you can put different things there if you want to. I use this thing as kind of a light source. Exit def name. So this is going to be the same as the entrance def, except this is something that you would put at the exit. So here you can see that I'm not using an exit. right? The idea here is that if it's walk in, then none of this gets used, right? If it's walk in, then you don't use an entrance. If it's walk out, then you don't use an exit. If it's not walk in, then you have to use an entrance. And if it's not walk out, then you have the option of using an exit. Alright, so use exit false, and I have nothing there. But let's say that I wanted to chain and do another labyrinth underneath this. What I could do is that I can make a labyrinth. Alright, so here's my big spooky labyrinth. And basically, let's say you enter here. Then at the end of the labyrinth, I'll have a teleporter or a key, right, a labyrinth key that'll open up another labyrinth. And then that one can have another one. So you can do kind of a roguelite thing. So the LabyrinthDef name is basically a building that's going to appear at the very end of the labyrinth. So if you use another labyrinth key there, then you can keep chaining your labyrinths together. Use exit is basically if you use the exit or not. Here I don't, so I just have it as a dead end. Encounter defs. So the encounter system itself is fairly complex. It's an interesting method. Basically, it's following. I'll have to make its own video on it. But what's going to happen is that these are going to be the encounters that are going to spawn inside of the labyrinth. Basically, whenever you go through and you make your encounter defs, you just want to record their def names and list them out here. What you want to do is you want to list them from hardest to easiest. Right? The idea there is that the way it's going to try to spawn these in, it's going to cycle through the list, so you want the hardest ones to have the earliest roll. It's a whole thing. For the best results, you want this to be the case. The hardest to easiest, inside the encounter def, you're going to have an encounter level. And that's going to determine the hardest to the easiest. So basically, you want the highest level at the top and the lowest level at the bottom. Linked labyrinths. This right here was the thing that I was telling you about earlier. Basically, any labyrinths you want linked together with this labyrinth, you would fill in their labyrinth defs here. Now, if they're spawned as a linked labyrinth, then it ignores if they're linked to other labyrinths, right? So only the first labyrinth actually cares about what it's being linked to. See what I'm saying? So therefore, if you spawn Labyrinth A and it's linked to Labyrinth B, and then Labyrinth B is linked to Labyrinth C, then it doesn't care about Labyrinth C. It won't get spawned. You have to link both B and C to A. Okay. Alright. But yeah, so this is where you put those in at. Okay, so now for probably the worst part, which is going to be the actual shapes, and then the lots. So the shapes themselves, okay, so if you saw my other video talking about how to set up these lots, then you kind of already know what the shapes are doing. What the shape is doing in this case is that these are going to be exclusion shapes. And what they're going to do is that you can use different shape names to designate different shapes on the map. Right here, for example, I used a circle. And I use 2 points for the circle. The first point is at 1515. The second point is at 8585. So they end up being somewhere over here and somewhere over here. And the idea there is that it generated a circle around the whole thing and only allowed the labyrinth to be spawned inside of the circle. The way the labyrinth works is that it uses these cross sections. So you can see that I made the grid inside the labyrinth so you can see where it's at. And these are all what I call nodes. And these nodes are the main points of the labyrinth. So you can see that my prim walk algorithm or my prim algorithm basically goes through and steps to each node as it goes through. So right here went up, over, up, over, 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 over. And basically what it's going to do is that it's going to keep doing that all the way through something like this, right? The dead ends come from the actual prim algorithm. It's a whole other thing. Anyway, so the idea then is that what's happening is that these nodes are how this thing spawns. So what these shapes let you do is they let you cut out certain nodes. So for example, right here I set a circle, and I said that it's negative. What negative means is that if this is the map and this is my circle, then only the things inside of the circle will remain, while everything outside the circle gets excluded, right? We use it as negative space. If the negative was true, then what would happen is the exact opposite, where everything inside the circle gets excluded and everything outside the circle gets included. So right here I said is negative, and you can see that what it effectively did was cut off my corners, right? So you can see that this node, and all my corner nodes didn't spawn. So you can use this to draw different shapes. You have circle, triangle, rectangle. You can do lines. I also made drunken path. A bunch of different things you can use right here, and basically you can draw them around to kind of shape, kind of chop up your instance. So, for example, if I would have put a rectangle right here, then it would have excluded these nodes. This one, and this one, and the path would have had to form around it. Alright, once again, these are a little bit harder to use, but this is how you can use different shapes to make different dynamic layouts of instances or of labyrinths, so they don't all have to be square. Okay, so for the lot list, this is going to be the complicated part. The lot list, I made a whole nother video on how to make these lots. The general idea here is that the lots are going to be these negative parts inside of these grid sections. Go ahead and erase all this. So generally what we're looking at whenever we're looking at these lots are just these rooms that occur inside of my grids. So here you see my grid section, and here you can see that I have a room inside. This is my lot. What you're doing over here is that you're including lot def names, right? And what this is going to do is that this is going to let you spawn these into the rooms that they fit in. It's a little complicated, but this is where you want to list out everything. So for example, let me just show you what it's looking like. So for example, Art P4T1, well, let me find them over here and then I'll show you. So let's say this room right here. This room is defined. This is a living room, type 1 horizontal, right over here. So the P4, I use all this as coding. You obviously don't have to, but the idea here is that P4 is for the path width equal to 4. Type 1 is the type of room it is. Basically, you can see the other video, I explain all this more. And then horizontal means it's horizontally oriented. So that's this room right here. And you can see that I actually have another instance of it up here, where it spawned twice, and another one over here, where it spawned again. Now I also have a type 1 vertical right here, the one right above it, and that's this one right here. Alright, now these are all living quarters, so that's why they have beds in them. Likewise, let me see, looks like I got mostly living quarters. Right here, this is going to be a type 2 horizontal workshop. So that's this one right here. So yeah, so then the idea is that as you go through, the more complicated this list is, the more possible variation you can have spawning into your labyrinth. As you can see that I do have a lot of repeats, and that's because my lists aren't that varied. Now the different types have to do with the different shapes, and as you can see here, I didn't worry too much about the types above 3. And the idea there is that like the types 4s, and I didn't even make a type 5, where they spawn, they happen less often, right? But you still want to make sure that you have something for them. Alright. I think that actually wraps it up. Alright, yeah, good stuff. So this has already turned into a really long video, so I'm going to stop it right here. I know y'all have questions, so hit me up if y'all need to know anything.